You might have noticed a large group of people came in and left. They actually have received this training on site as well. Something we're going to talk about towards the end is Panorama is available to come out and provide a really in-depth site-specific training for y'all. It's built into some of the things that we're doing already. So we'll talk about what that process could look like and bring you some more training to your sites. But I'd love to hear, just so that we can make sure we're hitting on the things that you all are hoping to get out of today, I'd love to hear some of the things that you're hoping to get out of, and if you are using Panorama, what that sort of looks like at your school sites or complex areas now. So any volunteers out there to share some objectives or use cases? Yeah, please, thank you. Perfect. Amazing. That's great. Anything else from your conversations that you'd worth sharing out? If we hear your objectives, it's more likely we'll be able to capture them. Yeah. Amazing. That's great. Amazing. That's great. That's great. Yes. That's right. Yes. So that's something not currently that we're doing with the state. There is we are, I think, as of this week, we have behavior data in the platform now as well, which we can walk through. So that is a component of it, so we can think about that PBIS side of things, but that tracking tool, that's just a newer product that Panorama started, so not something we're actively doing with the state yet. Yeah, okay, perfect. Any other thoughts, any other use cases for how Panorama is being used at your sites? Okay, perfect. Well, we can keep moving through. Appreciate the conversation, and we'll have more chances for you all to collaborate and have some of these talks as well as we're moving through these. Thinking about some of our ideal outcomes for today on the screen, obviously we're going to do some background on the Student Success Platform, which is when we're taking that SEL data and putting it side by side with academics, attendance, and behavior, and thinking about what data is available to what kind of folks in the room and what kind of roles and how to view that data. We're also going to build in some time to actually use the platform. So there is what we call a sandbox account for Hawaii specifically, so that there is anonymous data that's built in. But if you don't currently have an account, you can still see what that process looks like and see what it would look to visualize that SEL data and build in some of that action planning as well. And then we're going to walk through a couple scenarios within the platform, thinking about building out specific groups, building out interventions, and looking at our intervention library so we can really specifically target what SEL areas we want to provide more supports to students with based on that student voice that we've elevated through those SEL surveys. So really that idea would just be finding the students who need support, providing that support, and then tracking progress towards that support as well. So we're going to start on this idea of just the learning about the Student Success Platform. There's a lot to look through in this process, and it's been a multi-year process in terms of making sure the platform aligns to Hawaii MTSS and to the goals that have been set up by the Hawaii Department of Education. So really we want to think, moving through these questions, getting to that idea of awareness of what's there, and then being able to take action so that we can support our students and be able to build out interventions that support not only our entire schools and complex areas, but also looking at providing those individual student supports so that students can feel seen as that whole child perspective. I think what happens very often, especially when we are in those early stages of MTSS with schools or states or districts or complex areas that we work with, is that all of these things from that SEL, academics, attendance, behavior, they're sort of viewed as separate buckets, right? There might be roles or staff or folks that are really focused on one of these things independently. But the goal of the Student Success Platform is really to try to see these holistically and see how these can impact each other. When we are looking at these in a silo, we can impact SEL potentially, but we're not going to be able to see how that might then positively impact attendance. Or we might not be able to implement an SEL strategy when we see a dip in attendance or a spike in behavioral incidences, when knowing that might be related to something like sense of belonging or teacher and student relationships. What we want to do in terms of thinking about this more broadly is thinking about how all of these things together can cultivate and support a healthy student, a healthy child, and a successful student as they're moving through the school system. When we put all of these things together, we can really help students grow holistically and again as that whole child perspective. And there is research from the Panorama team and more broadly outside of the internal research that we've done that supports bringing all of these things together so that we're not, again, looking at things isolated from a really zoomed in view. Some of that research, and there is a resource that we can share out as well that highlights where this research comes from, links these SEL outcomes and looking at competencies related to CASEL, which are some of the SEL competencies we're elevating with our student surveys. For attendance, we can see what's considered a highly engaged student is 57% less likely to be chronically absent. Students who report low social awareness, that's that idea of being able to connect with their peers and being able to identify their emotions, are 2.5 times more likely to have one or more behavioral incidences. And from coursework, students who report that high self-management are 75% less likely to face failing grades. So we can see with these specific competency areas, and these are areas that we're elevating through our student surveys currently, we can link what that looks like specifically to some of these other indicators. And the ideal scenario can be here, if we see a student is chronically absent, of course there are attendance interventions and attendance plans we can put students on, but if we think about intervening and engaging with these students from a social emotional learning perspective, thinking about what it looks for them to be engaged in school with their teachers and their peers, we're likely to see that intervention plan be more successful. In terms of the continued research, a lot of this is coming from work that John Hattie has done when we think about what variables are the most important in terms of student outcomes. You can see this rating system on the side, and it's probably a bit small here as well. But the darker the blue is considered the highest likelihood to accelerate student achievement. And the red, which isn't on this spectrum we have here as well, would be likely to have a negative impact on student engagement, yellow being a small. So we're really looking at that small to high likelihood to accelerate student achievement. So positive perception on these topics on the left, these school-related factors. When we think about teacher efficacy, that's really that collective idea that teachers believe that they can be effective as teachers and that they can improve their practice. That is the highest likelihood we see to propel student achievement, which is something that we can elevate through staff SEL surveys as well. That next piece being student-teacher relationships. So just having that rapport, having that engagement with students is going to be that second highest likelihood to impact student achievement. And then as we're coming down, we're starting to see things, for example, like teacher professional development, school climate. There are impact slides on this around SEL as well, which we can include in those resources. But we can think about SEL outside of some of those specific competency areas like what we see with CASEL, when there's 5 specific competencies, but we can think about the things that impact that SEL outside of those sometimes rigid competency areas as well. Knowing that teacher-student relationships are likely going to propel all of these social-emotional learning competency areas, because if there's a trusted adult at school, it's so much easier to engage and build into how students view their school experience. So we're going to take another quick little break to do a turn and talk. I know we just did some overview on the idea of SEL, and we're going to transition into that student success platform quickly, but I would love just to hear about how you're building SEL into practice at your site or in your context if you're not at a specific site. So just thinking about how SEL might be impacting your work. And then we'll transition from there. So take a few minutes and we'll come back together.
bring us back together. I always hate ending the conversations. I'm like, I want to let you all keep talking, but we got to get through the presentation. Any brave souls want to share a little bit about how you're building SEL into your practices? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Awesome. Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And kind of zooming out, we wanted to make sure it felt clear how we support Hawaii's multi-tiered system of support as well. So before we kind of, in a few minutes, jump into the platform, I really wanted to make sure that it felt clear how this work is really grounded and aligned with the Hawaii multi-tiered system of support, or HMTSS. So as we think about the HMTSS, this is a data-driven, team-based decision-making framework for achieving positive outcomes for every student through a layered continuum of evidence-based practices. And so when we think about that, that really encompasses tiered interventions to promote positive school climate and mitigate the obstacles that might come up before they end up affecting student outcomes. And so you can see at the bottom of this pyramid, this nice little graphic, that this does include 4 key domains, which is inclusive of academics, the behavioral pieces, the social emotional pieces, which Kevin was referencing earlier and are all found in the Panorama Student Success Platform, as well as physical as well. And then you can see in terms of the pyramid, this also encompasses tiered interventions, first being those primary Tier 1 interventions for all students, those secondary Tier 2 interventions that are for more targeted supports, targeted interventions, and then those tertiary Tier 3 interventions for more individualized or intensive interventions. And 4 components of the Hawaii MTSS include foundational beliefs. So first, establishing as educators what we believe around student learning and student success. Data-driven, team-based decision-making, or essentially just making sound choices based on the right information and having that information at your hands. Universal screening and progress monitoring, as well as that multi-tiered system of evidence-based practices. And I share that because before we dive into the Panorama Student Success Platform, it just helps to know a lot about the research behind the connection of SEL with these areas of coursework, attendance, behavior, and also how this really fits into the Hawaii MTSS framework and decision-making processes. And so I know we've talked about Panorama Student Success a few times, and we mentioned it earlier in the presentation, but for those who might not already be aware, for those who might have held up the fist or held up the one, The Panorama Student Success Dashboard is a dashboard that provides you with a complete picture of a student's holistic progress across these areas. And we're pulling that information through your existing systems and just really giving you kind of a one-stop shop, one platform to have this information and really see that whole child view. And knowing that this is something that we've recently partnered with the Hawaii Department of Education on, just wanted to ask how many folks here are already familiar with the Panorama Student Success Platform, or, you know, this isn't the first time you're hearing about this or seeing this today. So maybe just show of hands if you've already been in there, you're already aware. Okay, perfect. And so again, seeing that number of hands, seeing that there are a few folks, this is going to be a really good way where we'll dive into the work, but for those who aren't already aware, it'll also give you a clear picture of how to take the next step with that SEL data that you might already have, might already be using through our surveys, and again, using it and applying it into this system to kind of get that more whole child view. And so when we're talking about the Student Success Platform, when we're talking about attendance, behavior, coursework, assessments, I wanted to share this slide just to give you a good picture as to where that information is coming from. And so when you're going to see attendance information in your Student Success Dashboard, when you're seeing behavior information, coursework, and grades, that is all coming through your student information system, Infinite Campus. In terms of assessments, we're pulling in iReady diagnostics as well as the state SBAs. The SEL information that you'll see in the platform is coming straight from the Panorama student surveys. And then those MTSS features are going to be embedded in the platform to really help you take action on all this data that's being synced and that is in this one platform. And I don't want to get too in the weeds on these pieces, but I did want to make sure I put these up, and I wanted to make sure we can easily reference these, especially as we dive into the platform. This might not make a ton of sense right now without having seen the platform, but we are going to get into it. And we also just wanted to share what it means in the platform when we define a student as on track, progressing, approaching on track, or at critical. And so here, just a quick picture of what that looks like in terms of academics, as well as what it looks like for attendance, behavior, and SEL2. And again, we will share this resource afterwards, so don't feel like you need to memorize these cut points and, you know, the color correspondences. We will share this out, but just wanted to give you at least a picture before we go ahead and take a look at the platform. Another opportunity to talk to your neighbors. We did put some questions up here just to kind of get a better sense as to what sources of student data or student information you may already be looking at, or that you feel like you're looking at pretty frequently, especially for your decision-making processes. If there are any intersections of attendance, behavior, coursework, and SEL that you're most curious about, or would be interested in understanding, seeing trends on in the platform, as well as if there are any student groups that you're most interested in learning about. Are there any ways that you're hoping to be able to further disaggregate the data that's available to you, whether that be different student groups, student demographics, and yeah, just wanted to get a better understanding as to what that may be and why. So we'll give you all a few minutes, and if you want to talk through any of these questions, we'll come back together soon. on mine, it won't affect the screen. Here we go. If you want to come over here. So essentially, it's saying that the start green for on track is based on student competencies that you're choosing to mark your survey. If the student reported strengths across all of those topic areas.
Okay, okay.
Versus at least half of them, less than half, and then none.
Okay.
So that's kind of how we determine those cut points and what those colors look like.
Got it. So I reported it out to our faculty, and then the question came up. Well, what is all topics? And I was like, the greens. I was like, I'm not sure, but so
You're not wrong.
I was like, maybe the yellows. But like, okay, it's the greens.
Yeah,
All right.
so let's say you chose to run management, social awareness, growth mindset. Let's just say those three. If a student reported strengths in all three of those, that's when they would show. Yes.
So I think when it came out, it was for all. So we were pretty good.
Yeah.
Our is either on track or progressing. So where that was, and it's something like a certain percentage of your grade level is on topic. They're in the excellent or good.
At the, are you at the district level or?
State.
State.
I'm at school.
Okay. Yeah, so we don't have like a grade disaggregation dashboard. You can filter through grades, but there isn't a way in there right now, at least in the student success platform, to kind of show grade. But we can get into that.
I thought it was in my
Okay. Perfect. All right, I'm going to bring us back together again. And just for the sake of time, I am going to keep us moving as I want to make sure we're able to have a good amount of time looking at the platform and being in there. So before we do that, we always like to preface and provide a framework for, having all this data in your hands. It's really important to think about our mindset as we review and then use that data in our decision making. And as part of the Hawaii MTSS, there is this data-driven, team-based decision-making process that we saw earlier. And this TDP is used systematically at multiple levels to determine the appropriate level of intensity and service necessary for students to be successful. And so in this graphic you're seeing, it starts with a concern or, an interest. We gather data, define needs, develop support, implement that support, and then evaluate that support. And it's really essential to establish these effective decision-making processes. So data analysis, decision-making really needs to and should be occurring at all levels of the HMTSS implementation. And this TDP is a really important part of that MTSS framework. And this next slide essentially just shows some important mindsets to keep when you're looking at data. Making sure that we're always remembering that we're evaluating and looking at how we can fix systems. We're not looking specifically at how to fix students. We always want to make sure we're keeping a growth mindset as we look at data and as we think about taking action and problem solving based on data. We want to make sure we're using student-centered language. And know that you're kind of working through your own personal ladder of inference. And for those who might not be aware, this ladder of inference is essentially a mental model for understanding and analyzing data. And this graphic you're seeing here is just a quick visual to show that, it's normal that we all start with data. We all start with information at our hands. And, sometimes without even knowing it, we're applying our own assumptions. We're applying our own beliefs. We have our own biases that can ultimately affect the action or the solution that we get to. And when we're looking at data, especially when we're looking at student data and how this is going to affect student outcomes, we always just like to say it's really important to climb this ladder of inference very slowly to make sure that as we're looking at data, we're not applying our own biases, we're not jumping to conclusions based on our own experiences, based on our own beliefs. It's always important to, consider alternative explanations for the data you're seeing, to really just make sure that again, we're not jumping to conclusions, we're not jumping to actions based on our own biases. And so as we dig into the platform, the data is going to be organized into 3 categories, which is schools, groups, and then eventually filtering down to individual students. And this really aligns to the tiered supports that we saw in that pyramid earlier. Tier 1 supports are that school level view, Tier 2 supports in that group level view, and then Tier 3 supports as we look at individual students and identify their needs. And so when we dig into the platform, in this guided tour we're going to take, we're really going to align to these 3 levels of supports. So at the school level, how can we use data to drive supports for all students? At this Tier 2 group level, how can we use data to drive targeted supports for certain groups of students? And then at this Tier 3 level, or the student view, how can we use Panorama data to inform more intensive supports for individual groups, for individual students? All right, and I'm going to pass it back over to Kevin.
Yeah, so this next portion, we're going to dive into a bit of a quick platform demonstration. What I do want to do, and I'm going to fast forward us a little bit here. If you have your own current login to the Panorama Student Success Platform that you've used, I encourage you to use that just because it's probably going to have your students in it and it'll be relevant. If you don't, if you haven't logged into Panorama before, and you want to see what the Student Success Platform looks like, there is what we call a sandbox account. I will say, obviously, there's a lot of underscores, a lot of capital letters and things like that in the password. So if you want to access that now as we're moving through, these login credentials are here. So basically what it is, it's a single complex area with anonymous data kind of scrambled around associated with students. So there's a way to kind of navigate through this and see what that student success platform looks like. So take a second, either log into your current student success platform that you use, or you can log into the sandbox account. If you're not sure, or if you've used like the SEL side of the platform before and you want to use the sandbox, my only recommendation would be to use a incognito or private browser, just because sometimes cookies can automatically associate a previous login and block this one. So if you want to log into the sandbox, the credentials are on the screen. I can make it bigger probably. Let's see about that. I can remember which side we're on over here. Oh boy, this is going to be tough. But so yeah, take a second, log in. We'll do a kind of a guided tour of this in a moment. Oh, cool. Thank you. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger for y'all just for a second while we're getting this set up. So that URL is mystudents.panoramaed.com, demo underscore Hawaii underscore sandbox underscore district admin. A couple more underscores in there. So take a second, you can plug those in. And I'm going to pull this up, this actual login on my screen as well, so that we can move through the same things together.
And if anyone needs help logging in at all, raise your hand and I can help you out.
Oh, it is SOFT 2022. Yep. All right, so we'll just jump in about a moment. All right, so if you were able to log in and you want to go through this process, this is essentially what you should be seeing on your screen, which is again, just sort of a shortened demo sandbox account. So what we can see here is that overview data. I know Christina went over those cut points around academics, attendance, behavior, and SEL. So we can see what some of those look like here. If at any point you want a refresher when you are live in the actual platform, there'll be a little color key indicator up here in the top right, which will just give us a refresh on what these cut points are. So that'll be built in as we're moving through this as well. This gives us in this case, a shortened complex area overview, which depending on role, these views will all be slightly different. If you're a counselor or a teacher, you'll probably just see your direct classroom. If you're a school leader, you'll probably see that data across the school. So there'll be some different views depending on permissions. But one thing I want to float is going to this individual students tab here. So if you click students at this top bar, and then you can select a school. So we have two elementary schools and a high school that we can choose from, so you can pick a school that closely matches your context. And from here, we'll get this individual zoomed in side of things, where we'll be able to see actual students within the platform. And again, if you're in your real student success platform, you'd be able to see your students. And we'll see these same indicator bars with some of these same cut points we've been following. So let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit. Oh yeah, that works. We'll do one more. Okay, so from here, we can see, again, these four areas, these four buckets that we've been talking about. We can expand on these individually if we want to see these specific competency areas that are being elevated through the Hawaii Department of Ed SEL surveys. So we can see things like growth mindset and self-efficacy, self-management, social awareness, those topics from those earlier research slides that we were looking at, where we can see some of that broader impact. And we might want to look at, for example, how many students in our school have elevated this highest strength around growth mindset. So we can see 26% of our students feel that they have high strengths in growth mindset. We can look at this in this school of 1,400 students. There's about 368 who have self-identified themselves as having that highest strength. We can scroll down, see these individual students. We can see where that spectrum is, and we're just looking at growth mindset, so we might want to see, you know, for a student like Evelyn, for example, they feel really strongly about their growth mindset, but we can see there's opportunities for growth around things like self-efficacy, self-management, emotion regulation. So while we might want to highlight what's working well from that student's perspective around growth mindset, we can look in that spectrum of what other SEL competency areas could this student use a little bit more support in. On the left side here, under the Filters tab, you'll see the demographics, assessments, and indicators dropdowns. If you click on that demographics page, or that demographics arrow, what we can see are the information that would be coming from Infinite Campus live in terms of your school's platform. So we can start to look at that data a little bit more specifically as well. If we want to look at students with high strengths and growth mindset who are, say, for example, in our 11th grade. So we know these are students who are going to be transitioning to that post-secondary life cycle soon enough. So we might want to really highlight how many of our students feel strongly about their growth mindset and are getting ready to start planning to transition out of high school. We can see now it's about 100 students in our school. We can get to this like very zoomed in, nuanced view of where our students are. And we can layer on additional demographics, things like race and ethnicity, English language learner status. If we're looking for a specific cohort of students, we can layer on things like last initial. So we can really get that zoomed in view of what it looks like to find a specific student group or even a specific student to support. As we're layering these things on, we'll see they're being saved up here as well. So we can see our 11th graders who are, feel that they have this highest strength and growth mindset, we might want to, on that same spectrum, look at our students who need additional support, who have identified that opportunity for growth and growth mindset as well. So we can look at our students who are in that lowest cut point, and we can layer on a few here just to have that broader spectrum, so we can really identify where growth mindset might be something where we can provide supports. And we can get to this filter just by clicking either on that bar or on these check marks on the side. So we can see now we're adding in these filters. We're just looking at 11th graders with a low or medium self-evaluated strength around growth mindset. We can see now there's about 135 of our students who fit that criteria. We see really close ties to academic outcomes with growth mindset, so we can zoom back out. And we might want to see our students, for example, from a mathematics coursework perspective, students who also have that opportunity for growth, meaning that they have a D or likely an F in one of their classes in math. We can add that filter on as well. We can see now we have 50 students in our school who have identified that need for support and growth mindset and are also currently in need of support from their mathematics coursework. So we're getting that idea of how these things can tie together. And then lastly, on this left side here, what we can do is see, if we click on that mathematics tab on the left, that'll show us the assessments that we have integrated as well. So for example, there's Star Math, iReady that are built in. We can look at these assessment windows to see which of these students, for example, were in a current intervention from a Star Math spring assessment or in need of an urgent intervention from that Star Math. So we might just want to jump in, knowing that we have these indicators, we might want to identify our students who are in need of that urgent intervention. And now we can see we're just down to 2 students in our whole school that meet this custom early warning system that we've essentially created, starting with that SEL data. I know I move through this quickly and often click too much, but like questions, thoughts about that process, and really when you're thinking about building out that student support at your sites or in your context, does this feel like a tool and a process that you all would be able to use when trying to identify students who are in need of additional supports? Seeing some nods, that's always a positive, but any questions around this process as well? Yes. The cut points are currently set at the state level. They are customized currently, so our standard cut points have been customized based on that broad picture there, but we don't currently customize by school. But it's something we can take back to our team just to see if that option's available or something that's coming up in terms of what we can do. So what we've done here with these filters is we've created a group, right? We've created this sort of early warning system based on these criteria we're looking for. So we have grade level, we have the most recent STAR assessment, we have their math courseworks, and we have that growth mindset filter built in. What we can do is save these criteria so that as students take that STAR drill or that STAR assessment again, as students self-evaluate that growth mindset again, and let's say they feel like they have a stronger growth mindset after an intervention, they'll essentially be graduated out of this group. We can save these filters so students will move into them or out of them based on how they meet these criteria, so we can have this saved custom early warning system essentially. Or we can come down and select these individual students if we know these are students that we really want to make sure we're following along with until they are transitioning out of our school next year. We really want to make sure we're continuing to provide some supports around mathematics. We can come up here and just click Add to a Group, where we'd create a new group for these students. In this case, we can call it Math Support for 11th grade. And we can just create that, and that way those 2 students will be able to we can come back to without having to go through that same process of clicking all these specific filters as we're moving through. And then what we can see up here is there's just a Groups tab. So we would then be able to revisit the groups that we saved, be it a smart group where we're saving the filters, or a static group where we're saving those individual students. If we are to dive into this individual student side of things, For example, if we're looking at Garth's page, this would be that collection of all of the data that's coming from these various sources, Infinite Campus and otherwise, where we can start to see all of that data together. So we can see Garth's academic outcomes. We can see where Garth is on our assessments, and knowing that this is something that we were specifically looking for, we can start to track that. Something between December and May, there was a significant dip in that assessment outcome. This is where we'd get this attendance snapshot. So we get a full day or by course absence and tardy level. So we can see if there were trends, for example, a significant block of time of absences in December. We can see that Garth has been skipping US history more often than the other classes they're enrolled in. We get that latest grade right next to it as well, so we can start to think about where these trends and where these things might be interconnected. This is where we would see logged behavior interventions as well. We get this sort of the where, when, why, how, and the outcome of these. And then finally, from those social emotional learning surveys through Panorama, we'd be able to see that change over time across these SEL competency areas. So we can see for something like emotion regulation, for example, Garth has been on the rise, slowly increasing that score over time. This is something we might want to hone in on and see what supports he's been provided to build that out as well. Finally, if we want to think about providing an intervention specifically to Garth, if we want to build out what we'd want to do on that tier 2 level, we can create specific intervention plans within the platform as well. So we can click on this Create Plan button, which will then take us to the intervention library, where we can select if we're focusing on SEL, for example, looking at that idea of growth mindset that we've been visiting. We can then select the focus area of growth mindset as well. We can decide what tier we believe this fits on based on that Hawai MTSS protocol, and based on what our team who's coming together support our students are really deciding in terms of support. And then from here, we would see custom strategies coming from the Panorama intervention library based on the area that we picked and that focus area as well. A number of these will be coming from the Panorama playbook, which we'll have some time to get into today as well. But with this intervention strategy, we're setting up the actual intervention itself. So let's just say we're going to build in check-in, check-outs, where we'd get some information around what it looks like to run that intervention. We would pick the duration, the frequency, how often we want folks to actually be meeting with our students around this. And then from here, we decide how we really want to monitor progress across this intervention. So we can choose an individual or a team who's going to monitor and update this intervention as it's being administered, if this is a 6-week intervention, for example. And we can either build this in with monitoring questions that are automatically run through Panorama as well, knowing that we might want to reevaluate Garth's growth mindset halfway through this intervention. We can leave anecdotal notes where the intervention champion will just be kind of monitoring how that check-in and check-out goes every week. Or we can add in a custom method where there'll be a baseline and target score likely linked to an assessment as well. So that was a fast overview of what some of these groups and processes can look like. Our goal for this next portion of the workshop would really be to have you all try to do some of that in your own practice in the platform as well. So Christina and I are going to be here to kind of support as you all are able to pull this up and move through some of those and create some of those custom filters and groups on your own. I'm just going to transition us back here. So what I want us to do is explore some of those views that we just looked at. And what you can do over the course of the next 10-ish minutes is jump into that platform, create some groups based on things that you think that you would look at your site, based on those indicators that you think would be important as your teams are coming together. Add students to that group, and then we'll move into that next phase of potentially taking action on that data too. So take about 10 minutes, work on adding students to a group. There is information at the top in terms of smart groups versus static groups. So take some time, move through that, and then we'll come back together in about 5 to 10 minutes. And if you have questions at any point, we'll be around, but please feel free to throw your hand up and we'll come see what's happening. There's some information on the screen as well for the process of creating those groups, how to save them, and even what it looks like to potentially share those groups as well. surprisingly only have about 18 minutes left of our scheduled time, which I know I promised that we wouldn't take that whole time. I feel like I'm going back on that. But I really appreciate some of the questions and working troubleshooting through some of these things and building groups together. I want to hone in on a couple more things before we kind of have the chance to go back. So I just want to highlight a couple more views. And Christina and I are here as well, so we'll be able to continue kind of supporting even after the presentation itself is over. I just want to showcase one more screen from the school tab, the students tab, and the school tab. I know with a few of you, we are working on actually creating interventions. At the school level, once teachers or counselors or your overall teams are adding in interventions, we're able to click on this left side. If we see the interventions summary button, we can see a summary of how effective our interventions are at supporting our students. So we can see how many of our students who are currently enrolled in interventions are on track to meet their goals. And I will say in this, there's 0%, which would be a troubling number to see, I'm sure. But in this demo environment, there's just not a lot of interventions. We can also see how many of our plans are up to date, meaning how many of our educators are updating the plans weekly or however often we set that. And then we can see that by area. So we're looking at SEL and by tier. So for example, if we jump in, we can see that for these two intervention plans, asking for help and bare belly breathing, our educators are updating them every single time, 100% with fidelity. So their educators are using it and providing that data to us so we can progress monitor. But for these four specific interventions, folks are behind from a progress perspective. So we can make some assumptions about what this could mean, but we also might want to follow up with our folks to see, do we need more training on how to run this intervention? Do we think this intervention's successful? Do we feel like our students are connecting with it? So we might want to think about how we can either update our interventions, but also how we want to focus our time in terms of what we're providing to our students from our tiered interventions in general. This will be empty as well, but then at the end, after interventions are completed within the platform, we can see what percentage of our students actually met their goals afterwards to do that same evaluation so that we can think about that system change again, think about the systems that we're using to support students instead of that individual piece. If we click up on this school tab at the top, we're going to go in a slightly more zoomed out view. There'll be another interventions tab here on the left side that will then show us basically the Hawaii MTSS health dashboard at our school. And we can see where students are across these three areas of support. And we can see this broken down by grade level, by race or ethnicity, and we can even look at this specifically by some of these intervention types. So if we want to see if there's overrepresentation in Tier 2 or Tier 3 for specific groups of students, we can kind of do a bit of an MTSS equity audit at our school to really see how many students are moving through these systems. So this is some of that summary data as folks are updating using these interventions at our school sites to really get a sense of what MTSS looks like in that scope of SEL and broader support as well. So I'm going to transition us back to the slideshow. I'm going to skip us a little bit. This is just kind of what we looked over now. The last piece that'll be on here, in that top right, you'll see this drop down to take you to the Panorama playbook. That is our intervention library. There's about 600 resources in there from academics, behavior, school climate, and social emotional learning that counselors and teachers can take out and share with their students directly. They're educator driven. So really that idea is we can use these to foster positive relationships as well. And they're all sortable by developmentally appropriate levels, subject areas. We're not going to run through this specific run through of strategies just for the sake of time, but that playbook is available to everyone who has access to the Panorama platform. And those are all resources that you all can adapt and take to your classrooms and to your educators today or tomorrow. Well, tomorrow, hopefully not, Monday. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. Which I think I can pass it back over to you, Christina?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up the session, we wanted to make sure you understood what follow-up support could look like. Again, we have a link to some FAQs. We also wanted to share an overview of what training will look like for the rest of the month. I know that as part of our partnership with the Department of Education, we have a general statewide training coming up. We also have personalized on-site trainings for complex areas and districts, and I think that's still being a little bit ironed out between our teams, so more to come there. And I know that we also have training sessions for MTSS team functions. We have that resource hub that Kevin had shared and linked earlier. And again, we'll make sure you have the stacks, you have all the links, you have all the screenshots and references to what we looked at today. And then one thing that Kevin mentioned earlier on in this presentation too is if you do feel the need or you feel like your school sites would really benefit from additional training or more hands-on training specific to your community and context, we do have the ability to include kind of more complex area partnerships as it relates to these trainings. We also linked a sample plan as to what that could look like, so you'll be able to take a look when we send the slide deck over. And we included just potential audiences, potential sessions where today, you know, we really focused high level on context setting, on introduction to the features and functionality of the platform. But we can go a lot deeper, especially if we understand your context, your community, and really help with making sure that the platform resonates with you, resonates with your team, and is really driving towards your individual school or complex area level goals too. And so with that, you know, we're going to wrap up and really want to thank you for spending so much of your time this morning and afternoon with us. We really hope the session was helpful, valuable, that you learned a little bit more about the Panorama platform, what Panorama can do to support your work and your efforts. And just note that, again, these resources are available. We'll send them out if you have any additional questions, but don't hesitate to reach out. You know, our session technically goes for another 10 minutes, so for those who might have additional questions on the platform or what you're seeing, we will still be here to linger if anyone does have questions or needs additional support. Thanks so much.